our beliefs as we think we do. So that we think most of our beliefs are based on evidence. And if asked, if prodded, we will provide justifications, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're sufficient for establishing knowledge. Okay, so back to beliefs. Our beliefs come from different places. Two major sources that we're going to focus on here. First is our personal experiences, and you were referring to this in the introduction there. Our personal experiences inform us about the world, and historically speaking, like our personal experiences, our senses, and our interpretation of those senses are good enough to help us survive, but they didn't necessarily evolve to help us find truth. So, for example, I I commonly hear this from students, and as a science communicator, I hear this from a lot of people. Like, I know it's true because I saw it. Like, I know Bigfoot is real because I saw a Bigfoot, or I know ghosts are real because I saw one, or I know aliens are real because I saw. I know homeopathy works because I tried it and I felt better. Whatever it is, these personal experiences, we assume that they're reliable knowledge. The criminal justice system is learning this lesson the hard way, that personal experiences can mislead us. Eyewitness testimony is a leading cause of wrongful convictions in those that have been overturned amongst death penalty inmates. For example, I saw ghosts when I was a child. I was about 5, and my grandma was visiting from a neighboring state. So she was sleeping next to me in bed. And I remember waking up to this fingernail going up my arm, like just really slowly like this. To this day, I won't sleep with my arms out of the covers. So the fingernail goes like this. I know. I literally think of it every time I have my arms out of the covers. So it goes up like this. And I opened my eyes and I saw this old woman. And she had straggly white hair and wrinkled skin. And I tried to yell to my grandma to wake up to help me. And she put her hand on my mouth. And it was this cold, wrinkly hand. And I tried to yell, like, Grandma, help me. And she put another hand on my chest. Like, I can legit, my memory, I know memory is flawed, but in my memory, I can still feel this. So that's sleep paralysis. I don't know if you ever experienced sleep paralysis. It's terrifying. Sleep paralysis is the in-between state where our brain is awake, but our body hasn't turned on yet. We don't want to act out what's happening in our dreams. So our brain shuts off the signals to our nerves. A similar experience is sleepwalking, which I do as well. So that's when the brain is still asleep, but the body is awake, right? So in sleep paralysis, though, the body can't move, but the brain is awake. And this is a problem for the brain because it's trying to figure out why it can't move. And so what it does is it uses pre-existing knowledge, assumptions, like what it knows about the world. Why can't I move? And history is full of, like, if you look at old paintings, there's ghosts and demons and succubi, and more modern, there's aliens and axe murderers. In my experience, please don't laugh, but I was 5, and the scariest thing my brain can think of was the witch from Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Like, she was terrifying. She was legit scary. So in my brain, that's what I saw. If I didn't know what that experience was, to this day, I could still look you straight in the eye and tell you, I know ghosts are real because I saw one. I felt her. But that's the thing about personal experiences. They can fool us. The other major source of beliefs are received wisdom. This is what we get from people around us. I was visiting Australia once. My husband and I were on sabbatical, and we ended in Australia, and we're using like one of those apps to figure out like, where can you go from here? And Vanuatu came up, and I'm like, what is Vanuatu? I've never even heard of it before, but that sounds like fun. So we went to Vanuatu, and do you know the John Frum cargo cult? Have you heard this? So in World War II, Vanuatu, you know what Vanuatu is, right?
Yeah, no,
My my American brain did not know what this was. This is far away from me. But right, isolated archipelago of a bunch of islands. It's been isolated for a really long time. Linguistically, it's incredibly diverse. Okay.
The
In World
Chinese
War,
have great interest in it.
why?
Yeah, the Chinese have great interest in establishing themselves there for military purposes and the like.
Yeah, strategic struggle over the South Pacific.
Yeah. Sorry, go on. Yeah.
No, and that's what that's what the States were doing. Like during World War II, we were fighting Japan in the Pacific. So we would island hop. We'd get to an island, establish ourselves, bring in like munitions and supplies, and then build bases and then go off from there. And we ended in Vanuatu. And they had never seen planes before, or blue jeans, or spam, or like just these basic things. And John Frum is probably John from America, is an American soldier. So there's what's known as a cargo cult there, where they worship this American soldier. February 15th is John Frum Day. Every year on February 15th, they put on blue jeans and paint USA in red, white, and blue on their chest. And they wear like they have makeshift like out of bamboo and sticks guns. They build runways and like fake planes, and they march. They sing American patriotic songs, and they don't know what they mean, right? And they show pictures of like American soldiers. They're worshiping John Frum because they want John Frum to come back and bring them more goods.
More spam.
More spam. Ugh. The famous quote, the Arthur C. Clarke quote, like any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. They thought it was magic. And so they're waiting for John Frum to come back. And actually, I found this really interesting article with from the Smithsonian with an interview from a priest there. And they're like, well, it's been like 80 years, 100 years at the time of the interview, and you're still waiting for John Frum to come back. Are you going to give up? And he's like, well, it's been 2,000 years and you're still waiting for Jesus to come back.
There's a tribe in a country in an island of Vanuatu also believe that Prince Philip, the husband of the Queen, is also a god, and they dress up like him. And but wait, anyway, go ahead. Sorry. Similar, very similar, yeah. In
so
same
to me,
country.
my brain was like, whoa, that is just really weird. And then I thought, well, wait a minute, what do I believe that they would think was equally weird? Simply because it had gotten into my brain through the people around me that I never thought to question. So we get this information from like clergy, parents, teachers, and all of that swims in, importantly, a sea of trust. Have you heard the phrase post-truth?
No.
That was one of the words. No?
Yes,
Oh.
yes, we have. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. It
Well,
was
some
one of
of us
the
haven't.
I want to live in your world. It was an Oxford year in like 2016, in the idea that we live in a time where people just don't even care what the truth is. But I don't think that's true. I think we live in a post-trust. In that we get most of our beliefs from sources we trust, either ourselves or from others. Like, do I know, how do I know if a news source is biased? If they agree with me or not, and if I trust them or not. It comes down to trust. The vast majority of the time, we are not able to independently verify all knowledge, so we have to trust. So the question is, who are we trusting and why? So I actually like the reframing of not post-truth, but post-trust. We're not aligning our trust with those sources that actually are the most credible, but instead with those that align with our existing beliefs, our identity, our tribe. Okay, so we come to our beliefs in these different ways. As a science educator, like, I'd like to say this is past, but it is not. A lot of science educators and communicators operate under what's called the information deficit model, which is, why don't people accept evolution or anthropogenic climate change or the safety of vaccines? They don't have enough information. So I just need to solve that by giving them more evidence. And if I give them more evidence, certainly they will accept it. That is not how it works, because our minds aren't blank slates. Willard Van Orman Quine has what he termed the web of belief. So if you imagine in your head all of your beliefs forming a web where they're all connected to each other, and at the center of that web are the most foundational beliefs, the core beliefs that we attach to our identity, our social groups. They matter the most to us, but they're all connected to each other. So, for example, if I'm talking to somebody who doesn't accept anthropogenic climate change, and I go into one of those nodes and they're saying something like, well, it's cold outside. Okay, well, I can address that. Well, there's a difference between weather and climate change doesn't mean it's never going to be cold again, and address all of those things. It doesn't matter, because that one single node, even if I'm able to pull it apart, is attached to everything else. We don't like inconsistent mental models. Would rather have a consistent mental model than that's wrong than one that's right but with gaping holes. So this is important for us when we're addressing other people and we're trying to correct the misinformation around a particular topic. We need to realize that that particular belief fits into a larger model of that person's worldview. And if we want to stand a chance of addressing it, we need to get as close as possible to the core and help them maintain a consistent worldview. I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. All of those beliefs that we're talking about, though, are not necessarily evidence-based. Are you all familiar with the difference between falsifiable and unfalsifiable
Yes.
beliefs?
Yes.
Yes, great. So this is one of those concepts. Karl Popper proposed this as a demarcation between science and pseudoscience. It's not a perfect distinction. I find it really useful for critical thinking, because we need to be able to distinguish in our head the difference between beliefs that we can prove wrong with evidence. So those are ones that are evidence-based and those that aren't. So for example, subjective beliefs aren't falsifiable. Like I like to use what I call critical thinking training wheels in my approach, which is non-triggering examples. So I tell lots of cat and fart jokes and that kind of thing because, you know, those are funny. Nobody really cares that much versus, I mean, I've already given you climate change examples, but you get my point. So for example, if I said to you that cats make the best pets, I have a cat. I love my cat. His name is Dmitry Shostakovich because my husband's a conductor. Dmitry is awesome. He's quiet. He's self-cleaning. Like when it's cold outside, I don't have to take him outside to go potty.
Don't have to
I
take
can,
him for walks.
right. Like I can leave him for a day and I have to go home 3 times to take him outside. Okay. I have evidence for that belief, but that does not mean the belief is evidence-based. It's an opinion.
Mm.
Subjective beliefs, actually broader unfalsifiable beliefs, are the ones that we fight about the most. We tend to throw lots of facts at each other to try and support these beliefs and prove the other person wrong. And we can do that forever because the belief itself is not evidence-based. And think about how long we've been fighting about things like various gods. I'll get to that in a second. Vague. So vague means it's too unclear to be tested. So in the United States, for example, and I think this is true in Australia as well, supplements are by law not allowed to make specific health claims. They haven't been tested for those claims, so they can't make them. So what they say instead is improves overall health and wellness or boosts the immune system, something like that. It sounds great, but it doesn't actually say anything. Another example. So like your horoscope may say something like, you have a need to be liked and admired by people. Right? That's true of most people. So these things, the thing with vague statements is their power is their vagueness. We are able to impart what we want onto what was said, as opposed to actually evaluating what was said. So we need to make sure that we clarify definitions, make sure that the claim is actually clear enough to be tested. If not, again, just put it in the bucket, not evidence-based. Okay, I think Americans say his name differently than Australians. Pythagoras?
Same. Yeah.
Yeah, he's the guy who did triangles.
Yes.
Mm.
Pythagorean theorem.
Yeah.
Did you know he was part of this group that thought that well, when you farted, you lost part of your soul?
Well, you do lose part of your body. The gas.
Is there anything like blowing smoke up your ass?
So your soul must really stink.
This is great. When I say this to my students, they do something similar. They laugh and and I'm like, okay, test that. They're like, wait, what? No, seriously, test that. When you fart, you lose your soul. Pythagoras wouldn't eat beans because he was afraid to lose his soul. Okay. So test that. And my students will say things like, so do I lose my soul when I burp? I don't know. You're testing this, you tell me. My dog farts. Does my dog have a soul? I don't know. Or my favorite recent one was if somebody else farts and I breathe it in, do I get their soul?
Getting their soul.
And finally somebody will go, wait a minute, what's a soul? How do you measure a soul?
How do you define the soul?
Right. Ding, ding, ding. That is what I was going for. Again, fart jokes are way better than like test God.
So if someone farts, do you look at them and down at the bottom and say, you are soul?
Stop it.
Or if you breathe part of it in, do you gain part of their soul?
Oh, dear me. Oh dear.
Yeah. Yeah. These claims though are inherently not testable. So when my students, because I teach biology, like an evolutionary theory is the single most unifying theory of all of the life sciences. And yet the major reason that people deny evolution is because they want to believe in a God that they think and their version, which means that the two are not compatible. What I try to teach my students is those two things are separate. Know the difference between the kinds of claims that can be tested and those that can't. So a more relevant and triggering claim would be something like Noah's flood. So I grew up as a young Earth creationist, and I was taught that the world was destroyed in a flood 6,000 years ago, except for the animals 2 by 2, and all animals then are descended from that. Okay, a flood is testable. We should be able to search for evidence to potentially disprove a global flood. We don't have that evidence. But even if we did, we could not test for a God as a cause of it. Right? And that's the difference. I want, in critical thinking, it's important for us to be able to distinguish between the kinds of claims that are evidence-based and those that aren't. And finally, the excuses are the claim is fundamentally falsifiable, but we don't want it to be wrong. So what we do is we move the goalposts and we make excuses to protect the belief and make it unfalsifiable. Conspiracy theorists, by the way, are masters at this. Fundamentally, conspiracy theories, as not real conspiracies, but conspiracy theories are immune to evidence. All evidence is interpreted to be part of the conspiracy. Missing evidence was covered up. Evidence that would disprove the conspiracy was planted. It was a false flag. They're paid actors.
It's all China's fault. Yeah.
Yes.
Mm.
But the point is, by making conspiracy theories immune to evidence that way, they make them untestable, which is not what a scientific theory is. Okay, so knowing the difference. Oh, and here we get to the dress.
Mhm.
Okay. Gave it away. But who sees blue and black?
I see gold
I
and
see
white in
gold-
this one, but
I
I
see
have
gold
seen
and white
pictures
as
of
well.
it when I thought it was blue and black.
They were grey,
Oh,
grey colour.
interesting.
Yeah, blue
So
and black.
And grey.
Oh, really? Wow.
I love showing this dress in a room full of people. They've seen the dress. Like, this is the dress that broke the internet. But like being in a room full of people who see something different is really spectacular because my husband sees white and gold. I'm like, what are you talking about? How in the world can you see white and gold? It's clearly blue and black. And so we talk about it like, oh, here, how can you say, God, you're so stupid. How could you miss that? Here, let me tell you why you're wrong. Right? Imagine, if you will, there's a concept in psychology called naive realism, which is the idea that we think we perceive reality as it is. We don't. And this dress does a great job of showing that. And when people don't see it like we see it, we assume, well, they don't have all the information. So I'm going to give them the information. And when that doesn't work, well, they must be stupid. How else could they not see it? So I try harder, but talking down to them, and because, I mean, come on. Or, wow, you're evil. You're them.
Huh.
What's wrong with you? Can you imagine like ideological tribes forming around blue and black and white and gold?
Yep. And then having
How,
wars over it.
like, can you imagine how many of our disagreements over the fact that we're actually perceiving reality differently? Like, it's mind-blowing to think of it that way. This is my attempt to make a graphic that combined various elements. Basically, like, there is a reality. There is a reality outside of our head. We don't perceive reality as it is. What we're doing is using our senses, filtering information, and then interpreting it through what we already know, our biases, our emotions. And then it jumps to a conclusion and it tells us with absolute certainty that we're right. It does not let us know there was any potential of uncertainty. But if you see white and gold and I see blue and black, imagine instead of fighting over like ideological tribes going, oh, that is interesting. You see that differently. I wonder why. I wonder what reality is. Could I be wrong? Let's work together to try to figure it out. That's the value of diverse perspectives. None of us has a full and accurate view of reality. If we want to understand objective reality as it is, diverse perspectives offer us more testable hypotheses. It does not mean that everybody is right. It does mean that it gives us something else to consider. Do you know who George Carlin was?
Yeah.
George Carlin. Have you ever noticed that anybody driving slower than you is an idiot, and anyone going faster than you is a maniac?
Yeah, that's right. That's obviously true.
Obviously, of course I'm right. Position. I thought about it. I'm really smart. You're
Well,
wrong.
it's amazing how it always falls into a two-valued system.
Yes, the extremes. This or this. For example, this shows polling of Americans on the right and the left and their perception of the strength of the US economy. Overnight, after Bush was elected, Republicans thought the economy was awesome. Democrats thought it was in the crapper. Obama was elected overnight. Democrats think it's awesome. Republicans think it's awful. Trump, converse. Biden, reverse. The perception of the strength of the US economy. We all have the same information. we're perceiving these events differently because of our tribes in this case. Have you ever watched a sporting event with somebody who's rooting for a different team?
Yes.
They're wrong.
Yeah, yeah.
They're cheering at all the wrong things. Yeah.
Yeah, my wife.
And the officials, like the officials are clearly biased against us,
Yeah.
but they think the same thing. Or how do I know if a news source is biased? If I agree with it. Or there was a fascinating study on protests, and they showed people the same image, but the protest signs were different. And it was either supporting their cause or not supporting their cause. And it was supporting their cause, they thought the protests were peaceful. And when it wasn't, they thought they were violent.
I like the research results similar to this, where just after Trump came to power, the Republican supporters thought he'd done a wonderful job on the economy, but there hadn't been enough time yet for his things to be implemented.
Yes. There's like a commercial playing in the States. I don't know, you probably haven't seen it down there. I don't even know what it's for. But at one point, there's these adults in the room and they're talking about the economy and if the economy is good or not. And there's a little kid in the room and the kid goes, "What's the economy?" They're like, I don't know. We're going to get to that in a second. But often we have these really strong opinions about things that we don't even really understand. We think we do, but we don't. Add to that, online, we all have our own realities. Between algorithms and our personal choices, we can actually have different views of reality that are being shared to us. One of my favorite things to do with my students, or when I give presentations in real life, is to put demographically different groups together and have them pull up their favorite social media platform. I don't want them to share something that they don't want to share, but scroll through. And how is yours different than mine? And then imagine seeing that, like the average kid is online, what, 6 hours a day in the States? Imagine that all day, every day, how that would impact how you view reality. Okay. So our beliefs aren't necessarily evidence-based, and we come to them through our rational ways. And then when we think about things, we're not necessarily rational either. Are you familiar with Jonathan Haidt's work with The Elephant and the Rider? Yeah. Or Daniel Kahneman's System 1, System 2? They're basically the same thing. I just find elephants to be a bit more charismatic than systems. So the basic idea is, imagine in your head, you have an elephant and then a rider on top of the elephant. The rider is the part of your brain that you think of as you. It's the part that's capable of rational and analytical thought. But it's on top of an elephant that's big and powerful and difficult to control. The elephant is always on. It doesn't take any effort. It's just constantly working in the background. And it uses its cognitive biases and heuristics. It takes shortcuts. It's what's the 4 Fs, fight, flight, freeze, or mating.
Right.
It's instinctual.
Takes about.
It takes
Yeah.
shortcuts based on what it knows, based on its emotions. It's highly emotional and tribal. And then it jumps to a conclusion and it's suggested to the writer, and the writer, we think the writer goes, "Wait a minute, is that true? Let me think about that and evaluate the evidence." The writer goes, "Yeah, that sounds about right. I'll go with it." And then if asked, the writer can come up with all kinds of justifications for why the elephant is right. They work in tandem. They're not necessarily in conflict with each other. The writer acts more like the elephant's PR department, justifying what the elephant already wanted to believe or do. Like, for example, I like cake. Actually, I like frosting. I love frosting. Cake is the vehicle for frosting. If I can just sit down with a tub of buttercream frosting, I'm happy. But my elephant wants to do that. But my writer knows that's not necessarily good for me. So instead it goes, well, you were really good today, right? You had a salad for lunch, you worked out. You're not going to eat it again tomorrow. You make other healthy choices. So basically, my writer is just justifying it. It is giving me cover for what my elephant already wanted to do. Now I can use my writer to overcome my elephant. I could use it to control the elephant, but that is a lot of work. So oftentimes we don't. It's a conscious process. We have to turn it on. We have to give it effort, and we have to override what the elephant might be automatically wanting to do. So here's the problem. When our elephant is highly motivated, these are the kinds of things that motivate our elephant. When our elephant is highly motivated, we can get into what I call an overconfidence cycle. So our elephant has jumped to these conclusions based on what it really wants to be true. And then confirmation bias kicks in. I see evidence for it everywhere. I'm able to discount evidence that doesn't confirm it. Motivated reasoning, the more motivated I am, the better I am at finding evidence. And then we get into overconfidence. So System 1, System 2 was proposed by Daniel Kahneman. He won a Nobel Prize in part for that work. Yes, thinking fast and slow. Read Thinking Fast and Slow. So great. Kahneman was once asked, if he had a magic wand to rid the world of one thing, what would it be? And he said, overconfidence. Have you ever tried to talk to somebody who is wrong, but really sure they were right? You can't get through, right? You can't learn. You can't grow. You can't change your mind if you're really confident that you're right. But that's the thing. Once we get these beliefs, we enter this cycle, and it's a conscious process to try and overcome it. And often that just takes too much work. We are really motivated to defend beliefs that are tied to our identity. And that web of belief I showed you earlier, these are at the center. The things that we attach to us. When beliefs that we attach to our identity are threatened, that same part of our brain, the amygdala, that is threatened when there is a physical threat, is activated. And we defend the belief to protect ourselves. We don't want to be wrong. It's not like the belief is wrong. The belief is us. So we defend that belief. And the more we portray this belief publicly as part of who we are, the more we signal to others, this is me, the harder it is to be objective about that belief. And the more we attach that belief to our tribe, the harder it is to change. Have you ever noticed how hard it is, as a science communicator, there are certain beliefs that align with various tribes if we broadly think right or left. Those in the other tribe, they are much easier for me to address. Here's why this belief is wrong. Let's talk about this belief. But if I go after the beliefs that my tribe believes, I'm scared. It's a hard thing to do. It takes a lot more courage because we risk losing our tribe, our social support. Brooke Harrington, a social psychologist, was, I'm paraphrasing here, but she said, if there is an E equals MC squared of social psychology, it's that social death is worse than physical death. Over the course of the pandemic in the United States, there were news reports of people dying from COVID who refused on their deathbed to admit that COVID was real. And from one standpoint, that seems completely illogical. How could you still not admit it? But imagine what that would cost that person to admit it. They're losing their life for it. That is their tribal belief. One of the most important things we can do as critical thinkers. Sorry?
Maybe they forgot to inject themselves with disinfectant. Just a little
Here
joke.
we go.
Yeah. One of the most important things we can do as critical thinkers is to separate our beliefs from our identity. Because once these beliefs become attached to our identity and our tribe, they are very hard to dislodge. Climate change is political. Evolution is tribal. Vaccines are political. GMOs, nuclear power, you name it. Once it becomes attached to a tribal belief, it is really hard to be objective and critical about. To take this home here, we think we're
Here we have the problem of nuclear submarines. Yeah. Very political issue.
submarines.
Are you going to spend 368 billion on nuclear submarines, which for a small country like us, I consider a bit of large waste of money.
Yeah, that does
But
sound
that's
like a lot of money.
also political, diverse political tribes. Yeah.
Yeah.
What's fear thinking?
So with these different beliefs, if we want to be objective about them, back to where did that belief come from? Did that come from a politician, a news source? Is it attached to a tribe? Is this something my ideological group supports? All of those things factor into trying to think about them in an objective and logical way. The problem is there's a lot of self-deception going on. Like we think we're being objective. We think we're reasoning. Of course, my belief is the right one. I followed the evidence to a conclusion. And the point is, most of what we do is we get to the desired conclusion first. This is our elephant through our tribe, our emotions, our identity, our biases. And once we get to that conclusion, we work backwards. We use motivated reasoning and confirmation bias to find the evidence that we need to find to justify to ourselves that that conclusion is right. I'd like to tell you that being smart or educated is protective against this, but actually some research suggests the opposite. When our writers are really smart, the better they are at finding evidence to justify to ourselves. We get better at self-deception. Do you have this here, this meme, the facts don't care about your feelings?
Yep.
There are a few things that trigger me. This is something that triggers me. Because look, technically this is true. It is true. Facts don't care about our feelings. However, this is really simplistic because our feelings do care about facts. And often the people using something like this don't recognize the role of their motivations and feelings. Not acknowledging them doesn't mean they don't exist. It just means that you're better at self-deception. Facts aren't neutral. Like we can find, if I told you, for example, like we know liquid water is important for living things. But if I told you that nearly all toxic pesticides are made with water, or that water is the leading cause of drowning, all serial killers have admitted to drinking water. Like I could cherry pick, these are all true. I could cherry pick that to make whatever story I wanted to make. So our selection of facts isn't neutral. It's more complicated than this. And it's about an awareness. That's the point. We need to be aware of what our elephant is doing so that we don't deceive ourselves. We've all flushed a toilet before. Is anyone here a plumber? Because if you are, you're disqualified from this exercise. This is
Changed
actually
toilet bowls.
say it again.
I've changed toilet bowls. I don't know if that disqualifies me.
Oh, that gets you pretty close. Well, okay, so you could change it to something like studies on this are on things like toilets, bicycles, zippers. There are things that we use every day. And if you ask people, how well do you know how these work? It's like, oh yeah, I know how a toilet works. I know how a bike works. I know how a zipper works. Great. Draw it. Explain it in depth. To someone who has never done this before, put it together so that they can do it. Once we have to do that, we realize what we don't know. And in studies, this actually shows people who think, well, you press a button and it flushes. I like doing this with my students with text messages. How well do you know how text messages work? Oh, great. You send a text message. Great. How does that work? Well, you type it in and you send it. I think you're missing a few steps. But it's not until we have to explain it that we realize it. I love this meme. I'd love to go back in time and blow people's mind with my incredible knowledge. But how do you make this electricity? I don't know. You plug it in
Mhm.
and it works.
What's beyond the
This
plug?
is what's exactly. This is what's known as the illusion of explanatory depth. We don't know what we don't know until we have to explain it. And it's a great way to check yourself on overconfidence. Try to explain it. If you can't explain it, so I just gave a talk recently to an atheist group, and it was about my experience of changing from a young Earth creationist to a biologist. I'm a critical thinking communicator, and they all accept evolutionary theory. So I gave them a few questions from the exam that I gave my introductory biology students, my non-majors biology students, about evolution. And they got about half of them right, but they weren't really sure. They were multiple choice questions. The point is, they accepted evolutionary theory. Their knowledge was accurate in that it aligns with what we know to be the best available knowledge at the time. But it's not because they know what they're talking about. They don't actually know it. You have to have pretty good expertise in these areas to understand it. What we want to do is not only align our knowledge with the best knowledge available, we want to make sure that we're not overconfident about it. It's okay. It's expected to, what's it called when you outsource knowledge? As humans, we have to. I have no idea how a toilet works. I have no idea how electricity works. I have pretty good knowledge about evolutionary theory. I have pretty good knowledge about anthropogenic climate change. We want to calibrate, be honest with ourselves about what we actually know, and place our trust in the most trustworthy sources. Okay, remember the Seekers? Now you know the world didn't end, but they thought it was going to. December 21st was the end of the world. They gave away their money. They lost their jobs. Some of them lost their kids, their friends and family. They moved in with Dorothy. I mean, the world was going to end. They didn't need any of those things. They collected their sacred books, which were Dorothy's prophecies. They couldn't wear metal. Apparently, metal would react with the UFO field, magnetic field. So like they couldn't have glasses or like metal fillings in their teeth or like underwires in their bras or zippers or buttons. But most of all, they had to believe. Now, December 21st was the end date, but also they were told that Sananda and the aliens could come at any time. On December 17th, they got a phone call. Captain Video from outer space was calling and said that the aliens would land that afternoon in Dorothy's backyard. So they frantically prepared. They took off all their metal. They went out into the backyard and waited for the flying saucer. By 5:30, they gave up and went inside. Dorothy told them that it had been a practice session. They hadn't put together that Captain Video from outer space was apparently a popular radio program at the time, and they had been pranked. On December 18th, they got another message that the aliens were coming now. And again, no aliens. December 21st arrived. Now, remember, this is coming from Leon Festinger and the fellow psychologist. They had infiltrated the group, so they were watching what is happening. That night, they sang Christmas carols and waited for salvation. The world was going to end and they were going to be saved. At 12:05, there were no aliens. Someone in the group noticed the clock was wrong. So They had time. They're good. At 12:10, they noticed no aliens, and Dorothy said there's a change in plans, like take a slight break. By 2:20 in the morning, there was still no aliens. Dorothy got a message that they should take a coffee break, so they did. By 4 o'clock in the morning, they were sitting around in Dorothy's living room on the sofa, looking at each other, stunned silence. They could not figure out what was going wrong. Dorothy was crying. Their faces were frozen. Do you think they changed their minds?
No.
No. At 4:45 in the morning, Dorothy got a message that their belief had saved the world from destruction.
Yay!
Not only were they not wrong, they had saved the whole planet and all the people. You're welcome. Charles Lawhead, who is one of the her biggest supporters, said, I've had to go a long way. I've given up just about everything. I've cut every tie. I've burned every bridge. I've turned my back on the world. I can't afford to doubt. I have to believe. There isn't any other truth. Here's the thing. The more we're mocked, the more we've cut ties with others and are insulated with others who believe what we believe, the more we've invested and risked our reputations, the less able we are to change our minds. We have to save faith. We can't admit we were wrong. To me, this is a lesson not just for us, but for dealing with other people. We need to allow ourselves the space to be okay with being wrong. But we need to allow others the space too. Right? There is an understandable sometimes tendency to want to pile on people who are wrong. That does not help. And the fear of that pile on is what prevents them from being able to admit it. So why don't facts change minds? Because it's not about facts. It's not about facts. On the surface, it looks like facts. I'm giving you facts. You're giving me facts. And we're arguing over facts. Why won't facts work? It's not about facts.
The elephant.
It's the elephant. We think there's two of us in this conversation, but there's four of us. My writer isn't talking to your writer. My elephant is talking to your elephant. And the sooner we realize that and connect at the elephant level, the more we are able to have a productive conversation and get closer to the truth. I'm going to go on into the next presentation in a second, but I just want to stop here and ask if you have any questions.
Well, I have some comments. You were saying about uncertainty. In general semantics, we have a formulation called the map is not all the territory. So territory is basically our word for reality, and map is our abstraction from reality. And also you're talking about vague statements. Another thing we have, which is actually in the book I sent you, something called IFD. Now, that's when people idealize, and one of the problems with is having very vague goals, because the goal is so vague, then they don't know whether they've achieved it or not. So that's a couple of our formulations to what you were saying.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like with a lot of pseudoscience, there's a tendency to equate vague symptoms with vague improvements. And that's a problem if you're trying to figure out if something is actually effective, because you haven't actually narrowed something down to whether something could be tested. That's interesting.
That's right. In other words, the statement is so vague, you can't be sure you've tested it properly or not.
Did you say
Or you can easily
IFT?
Sorry?
It's inference,
Fact.
fact.
No, idealization, frustration,
Idealization, sorry.
demoralization.
That's it. got it
Say
right.
IFD.
it again. I missed it. I'm
Idealization,
so okay.
idealization, frustration, demoralization. You don't have to take notes. It's in the beginning of the book I sent you. Yeah. which you probably haven't
Okay,
got yet.
excellent.
Yeah.
No, I haven't, but yes, thank you.
Very similar concepts we're working from
Mm.
in questioning your beliefs and wondering whether you're right, like, you know, where your beliefs came from, where your assumptions come from, and to question them, which is, you know, what you're saying.
And much of
Yeah.
what we've been talking about, Melanie, can be hung on what we call a structural differential. Abstractions about abstractions, not being able to know reality, and going to a descriptive level about things we can agree on. So a lot of this stuff is about the structural differential, and that in a way is the heart of general semantics.
The structural differential is a diagram that talks about how we abstract from reality, and mainly leaving out details, but also generalizing, which is putting stuff in, and distorting information.
Projecting onto reality.
Yeah. But general semantics deals mainly with the distortions due to the use of language.
Okay, so putting this into something that I might communicate about, one of the I find definitions of terms to be one of the most common sources of disagreements. Like, as a science communicator, one of the words that's constantly tripping people up is theory. Like, what's the difference between a scientific theory and everyday use of something like theory? But even like right now in the States, we're having conversations about arguments over
Arguments.
Much
what
more.
woke is, or DEI, or racism, or all of these terms are inherently, they have some vagueness to them, and I think that we're talking past each other because we mean different things. Is that kind of what you're referring to?
Yeah, we call that bypassing, where one person has one meaning and the other person has a different meaning. Like a scientific theory, using the word theory in that culture, has a lot of support for it, like Einstein's theory of relativity. Whereas in general usage, the word theory is, oh, I have a theory that Tom, Dick, and Harry passed the exam because they cheated. In other words, it's just a general idea with probably not much support at all. In other words, just an opinion. Yeah.
Exactly. Okay,
Yeah,
fascinating.
I like the way in which your presentation talks about the elephant in the room without actually saying it, other than specifying an elephant, the hidden, shall we say, the elephant in the room. And that's a very powerful projection of turning it into an intent, so that the elephant in the room is what's driving it. And in your case, you're saying that each person has their own elephant in the room, which of course has been an analogy to knowing that knowledge is not able to be easily accessed. The idea of the elephant in the room was a referral of saying, that someone standing in a room with a big elephant in there and another person standing in the room with the same elephant would not necessarily be accessing the same point of that elephant. So if they said, oh, it has a long, rough, surfacey thing that seems to manipulate and move easily, and the other person says, no, I feel a swishy something with a brush, and it's, you know, it's curved, and this is saying, well, you're at the buttocks and the other one's at the snout. So they are experiencing completely different things at that point or that juncture. So the idea of the elephant in the room,
the sixth line meaning the elephant.
that's right. So the idea is that no one's really getting the same elephant or the same part of the same elephant, but you've turned it into, now we have two elephants that they're riding. Incidentally, the person sliding down the trunk, I would say, would be an extremely rough experience, because I believe the hairs on their snout are somewhat bristly. So I think that would be very painful experience. But anyway, it doesn't look quite the right thing that would occur. But anyway, but what I found was very interesting is that it helps to, in a roundabout way, and you haven't said it explicitly, but in our early general semantics studies, well, taming talking to your teenager, the idea was to address the emotion first. That the idea, and it was to address the emotion within ourselves, what we call the stop technique, 1, 2, 3, or the ABC diagram, where that you recognize that you have a very strong emotion, which you're creating as the elephant, as the strong emotion, and being able to stop for a moment and recognize what is what beliefs, what things do I bring to the table, and what things am I triggered by out externally, or things that my senses have brought in. So in GS, we'd probably attack it more directly from the emotional trigger as the signpost, or the trigger to say, this needs to be re-examined.
I personally find, so our emotions drive much of our reasoning. And those who aren't aware of that, or who deny that, are more beholden to their emotions than, not only than they realize, but you can't get a handle on that part of your reasoning unless you acknowledge it, unless you're aware of it. So that's why like I said, I was triggered by the facts don't care about your feelings thing, is because they think they're above some sort of emotional reasoning, and they're not.
Well, we would actually equate it to like time, space. So when you refer to time, you need to make mention that it belongs in space as well, so that it's actually hyphenated, time, space. So in GS, we would probably describe it as thinking, feeling. And I was explaining that the rhetoric of Trump often is feeling, thinking, hyphenated, so that they are connected. They don't actually exist in two separate realities.
Yes. Melanie, can I move on to the comment that I was rather taken by, was somebody who said, ask the question, if you had the choice from the fairy godmother or elsewhere, what would you rid the world of? One thing that you would rid the world of. And they answered, overconfidence. And that relates to the IFD, the ending in demoralisation. I can't help thinking, I struggle with that a bit, because we think of, Vladimir Putin, most of us think of that he's bad. Zelensky in Ukraine, most of us think that he's good, doing the best he can for his people. Now, both of these people have enormous self-confidence, which many of us would think is unjustified. Putin thought that he could take Ukraine in a few days, come in and take off the government and seize the Kiev and so forth, and it would all be over very smartly. So his confidence was unjustified. Zelensky, most of us thought, well, how could he defend his country against one of the greatest powers in the world, And he said, oh, we have no choice. I've got confidence that we can do that. Great things are often done by people with an unreasonable confidence. But that's great good things and great bad things, Adolf Hitler had great confidence, ultimately unjustified. So it is something we need to justify. We can't tell young people, your ideas are ridiculous, you'll never be able to achieve that. It is sort of unhealthy, but we know it can go the other way as well. So it is something that we struggle with, I think.
There's a lot there. I'm not really sure how to answer that, but thank you.
I've got a question about the setting up the elephant and the rider as like a 2x2. I'm wondering, like, from an evolutionary point of view, whether or not something like the triune brain model that differentiates out the even earlier, maybe than, elephant's a mammal at some level, or at a fundamental level, that there might be even more primitive aspects that are involved in the competitive,
You mean lizard brain?
lizard brain, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, so it's that is not my area of expertise. I do know that there's some like what we previously understood about the triune brain is not necessarily what it is now, in that the triune brain hypothesizes that like there was layers added on over time. That said, there is the part of our brain, like the lizard brain, I'm air quoting here, but the amygdala, the part that is highly reactive. And then the part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, that is more capable of higher order thinking. And so there are different layers, and they do serve different purposes. They don't function necessarily independently. And actually, it's a really good question as to whether other mammals, like how the different parts of the brain are work in other mammals. Like elephants are, by all, they're pretty intelligent and highly social.
So
human-
whereas lizards, for example, aren't, but they have competitive strivings. So for example, if you're saying that one of the biases we can succumb to is a social affiliative tribal type of bias, is there something even more primal motivating that, so to speak, to differentiate out from that? That's all.
Oh, that's interesting.
Like it's raw survival. That's at the very core. You know, as an evolutionary biologist, I'm sure you'd appreciate that all life is competitive at some level. You know.
Yeah, and humans, we only lived in this environment, like the online environment, we're talking 20 years. The Gutenberg press is what, 500 years old. If we go back in time, in evolutionary time, the human brain spent most of its time as hunter-gatherers, where we were in small. Those groups were our source of survival. We had to trust people around us. They were not only our friends and family, but they were literally the difference between life and death. Rival tribes, all these other threats. Like, the point is, that brain was adapted to keep us alive in that environment, and not necessarily to help us find truth. And the problem is that we have those tribal and emotional and biased brains, but now we're on these like I can go online and instantaneously find anybody around the world with the same kinds of like weird beliefs that I believe, that can descend me into a rabbit hole of information that confirms that belief, that's playing to that emotional and tribal aspect of my brain. And most of us are not aware of those factors at play. And it's very easy, like I haven't got into misinformation yet, but misinformation, broad category, is information that's false or misleading. Some of it is purposefully false or misleading, not all of it, in which case we call it disinformation. But if I was a disinformation purveyor, if I wanted to manipulate people, the easiest way to do so would be to play to those basal instincts, to play to those emotions and biases, the us versus them, to rile up the amygdala by using fear and anger and outrage and othering people. Back to, I'm rambling here for a second. Do you know the movie South Pacific, or the musical South Pacific?
Yes, of course.
There's that song in there, "You have to be carefully taught."
Yeah.
You don't have to be carefully taught. Like, our brains instantaneously, almost like from a very early age, they recognize differences in skin tone and differences in language. They separate us versus them. Us, good. Us, trustworthy. Them, bad, evil, not trustworthy. We may have to be taught who particularly to hate, but the idea of classifying individuals, people, into my tribe, their tribe, is instinctual. What we have to be
I'll
taught.
jump in with a question that relates to, you're about to go into the topic of misinformation, so maybe your work will cover this. Just because, part of, reasoning is, the testing of our hypotheses and things like that. In terms of, we've just been through some pretty big world kind of global events and things like that. There's a whole bunch of talk. Misinformation probably wasn't even on the radar for people before, Facebook and all these political talking heads were talking about it. And so, it's this highly, highly charged, politically charged. It can be kind of a divisive thing. It turns us into kind of tribal kinds. I'm thinking about that in terms of first of all, we've got biases that are kind of inherent and inbuilt. We've also got people who are motivated, as you say, in their reasoning. And we're subject to manipulation and influence by all kinds of things. And even the way that this can be kind of weaponized, as you can imagine, and I'm sure you've considered this in your research, is that our own thinking vulnerabilities can be reverse engineered so that someone can literally have access to the reactive part of us. I've heard it called variously, cognitive warfare, for example, to really target the base level of our ability to think for ourselves and independently, etc. So the test of the hypothesis about, is it an important thing to learn about misinformation, for example, because we are so manipulable? How did the proponents of misinformation, of the concept, how did they fare? If we're going to test hypotheses, how did they fare during, let's say, the pandemic was obviously a big one. It affected everyone. How did they fare with the Facebook thing? And they had the fact checkers and all this kind of stuff to be like a single source of truth, for example. How did they fare? There was a lot of fear around, the vaccines and things like that. How did the claims regarding misinformation fare? And do we have now, for example, the ability to test that and have some kind of objectivity or return a sense of reason? Because there was a lot of fear in the air at that time. And everyone's got their beliefs about it, and we're all subject to that. We all can be influenced, etc. I was hoping that you might have something to say about that, because it's kind of global in that sense, and that maybe your talk talks about that as well. My experience was, sorry, just to don't mean to hog the floor here, that some of the proponents about why it's important to know about misinformation were themselves hornswoggled in the process, were often proponents of it themselves in terms of like government actors and things like that. They were self-interested. They were in possession of these kinds of technologies to undermine people's confidence in their own reasoning ability, if we can have any confidence in it. So I was hoping that could be addressed in your next segment.
Yeah.
Well, Michael, with regards to your question, in the early days when psychology and philosophy were brother and sister, and psychology moved away, it got a lot of its money from the military and also the advertising industry. In the early days, they did a lot of psychophysiological experiments. So they have a lot of data about how people react. So they know what sort of buttons to press and what we're susceptible to. After that, they employ conditioning, so they know what habit does to us, and they have access to how we're motivated by habit. And then after that came cognition. That is how we think, because conditioning was about how we behave and feel. Oh, feeling with cognition too. But then the outer layer of cognition came in and they tried to reason with us. But underpinning all of that is our physiological responses. Very powerful stuff.
Agree.
Hopefully that addresses that in some way.
Yeah. We all had probably visceral responses to to what we've all been subject to.
Oh, I can't share again.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
Down.
Yeah,
My bad.
here you go. This is the new you. You're a new identity now.
And me.
So she needs new permission. Yeah.
All right. Not right. What have I done? I have no idea. Okay. Just fingers crossed.
Here we go. Yeah, we're on. The misinformation trap.
Except I don't
There's the elephant again.
I don't see it. Like I can't play it because I don't see it.
Oh, we see it.
Is there a present button there somewhere?
Or if you press F5, then PowerPoint should resume.
Okay, throw that away. Okay.
F5.
While Melanie's
Entirely.
She's in.
Turn that off. Don't stop it.
just while Melanie's working on that, I would encourage everyone to have a look at the AGS website. Near the top of that is a link to Melanie's own website called Thinking is Power, where you will learn a lot more about what she's doing and the context of what she's saying today.
And also on our website, we have links to summaries about our previous presentations.
Here we go again.
Did that work?
Yeah, the misinformation trap, why we fall for it.
Okay.
You've worked out all your windows.
I it's not actually entirely right, but it at least you can see it. So that's all that matters. So no, this isn't right. Oh my God. I am so sorry. My tech department is off doing something else. Do you still see that?
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay. So you're not seeing my notes, is that right?
No, we're just seeing
No.
the misinformation trap.
With the elephant and the
With a map
red
of an
ribbon.
elephant.
Yeah, we
Yeah,
have our
take a
elephant.
picture.
Okay.
Oops.
So in
That's
in
what we
1980,
see.
that's what, oh, perfect. Brilliant. I have no idea how long this is going to last, but right now it's working. So let's go with it.
That's what we call map territory. Taking a picture and showing it to you.
So as you can tell, the elephant and the rider plays strongly in why we fall for misinformation, actually, which Michael, hopefully to answer your question here, come back. I am totally off my game right now. Make sure that I answer it. But I think you're largely referring to this. I'm going to tell you another story and then talk about misinformation itself, but it's going to relate strongly to the elephant and the rider, as you can tell. So in 1981, the CDC identified a rare form of the Center for Disease Control in the United States. It identified a rare form of pneumonia in gay men in California and New York. Over the next few years, the disease was named AIDS. the virus that caused it, HIV, was discovered. But cases grew very quickly. Early on in the pandemic, people were really scared. They didn't know, we didn't know what was causing it, how it was spreading. We didn't have any treatments for it. Also, because of the primary population that it initially targeted, there was a lot of homophobia. There was accusations of it being punishment for immoral behavior. It was nicknamed gay disease, gay cancer, gay pneumonia. By the late 80s, there was a strong consensus emerging of the origin of HIV, which was chimps in West Africa, likely bushmeat hunters. Today, there documented probably over 35 million deaths from HIV. This is one of the longest running pandemics. Now, this here is, are you still seeing my Ed Boyd's, Ed Graves?
Yes.
The man
So,
with soul days.
Ed Graves was, he was born in 1952 in Ohio, actually West Virginia, but he grew up in Ohio. By all accounts, he was extremely intelligent. He went to the Naval Academy, and a few weeks before he graduated from law school in 1992, he tested positive for HIV. His research led him to believe that HIV was created as a bioweapon from the US government at Fort Detrick in Maryland, and that it had escaped from the lab and was a genocide against Black people. He actually thought that he contracted HIV from some form of a dart gun, which he called a microbio inoculator that could infect victims from over 100 feet away without them noticing, or potentially from mosquitoes that had been genetically engineered. There was actually some truth to the idea of bioweapons from Fort Detrick. It had been a site of bioweapons testing. He published the state origin of AIDS. He sued the federal government several times, even appeared before the Supreme Court. In one of his conversations, he said, if they didn't want me to discover the true origins of AIDS, they shouldn't have given it to me.
Mm.
In 2001, he was injected with Tetrasil, or tetrasilver tetroxide, which is an alternative treatment. He noted that his health improved immediately, and he went on to promote it as a secret miracle cure that could cure AIDS within 3 weeks. This spread throughout parts of Africa as well, where the treatment was touted as a cure-all. Like the bottom line is, Ed Graves was an intelligent man who is trying to understand why he was sick, and he fell for misinformation. So we're going to come back to Ed Graves. Misinformation is actually surprisingly difficult to define. So information is knowledge that's transmitted between individuals. Misinformation is information that is false or misleading in some way. Information or misinformation can become part of our beliefs, in which case it informs the decisions that we make about the world. It's a spectrum, by the way. It's not necessarily true or false or right or wrong. There's gradations of wrongness. There's also a difference of intent. Misinformation as a broad category is not necessarily, it doesn't depend on intent. Disinformation is information that is spread with a purposeful intent to deceive, but it's a type of misinformation. And our goal is to avoid being fooled. I made this silly little graphic to try to help us understand what effective information screening looks like. If we broadly categorize information as either true or false, binary here, oversimplifying, and again, broadly oversimplifying into accept or reject. What we want to do is accept true information and reject false information. And we don't want to reject true information or accept false information. So the filter that that we need to empower for the misinformation age. Humans have always exchanged information, and there is a lot of information these days. With all information, there comes the risk of misinformation. And so what we want to be able to do is screen it effectively. Back to our elephant. Why are we vulnerable to misinformation?
Before you go on, you were basically talking about type 1 and type 2 errors in the previous screen, weren't you?
I love the smiley faces. That's the simplest way I've ever seen it explained. Yeah, very nice.
That's actually that actually is a H1 and HO and HA diagram too in stats.
That's what he's
Oh,
referring
the hypothesis and the
again, the idea of it being too valued. I mean, it discounts the idea of so mostly true or mostly false. And yeah, it's even in World War II, or was it World War One, that the information was categorized in was it A, B, and C, 1, 2, and 3, I think, to at least give gradations of accuracy of who was receiving and who was sending, and what that information was trusted, what level. So even they had gradations of accuracy, shall we say.
Okay, so this is the first time I'm hearing this about World War One, and I'm not going to be able to remember this. Can you send that to me?
Yeah, just in the case of World War One, when they were getting information into, say, in Britain, what they do is they categorize it in relationship to who sent it, and it was given an A, B, and C in terms of what was the reliability of that information. So it was gradated, and then it was 1, 2, or 3, meaning that it was third hand, it was hearsay, it was getting further away from the truth, so to speak. In other words, recognizing its source, where that information came from. So an A1 information was that it was a direct source, and they directly had contact with that. Hence why we expect journalists to be in the field, on the ground, when they're reporting about something, because they are physically and actually there. Yeah, so the gradation of information, it's funny how Facebook, well, social media has converted it into a two-valued system, a almost binary process, which fails to gradation. Yeah.
And if there is time at the end, and if you're curious to ask me about my experiences with Facebook, please remind me, and I will share you.
We'll do that later.
Very interested. Yes.
Okay. Why we're vulnerable, I'm going to talk more about specific vulnerabilities, but as a reminder, I mean, it's our elephant. Like, this boils down to our elephant and who we trust and the elephant's motivations. Now, this is my attempt to, I'm writing a book on misinformation at the moment. It's called A Field Guide to Misinformation. So I'm kind of up to my eyeballs at the moment in misinformation, and loving the opportunity to try to organize my thoughts on this. So I've boiled this down to 4 broad categories of why we're vulnerable. If we want to not fall for misinformation, there's 2 things we need to be aware of. One is us, and the other is the misinformation. So the filter is what stands between those 2 things. As far as we're concerned, we're vulnerable first because of our intuitive thinking. Those fast automatic judgments, this is our elephant. There's over 200 cognitive biases so far that are documented at this point. A couple of the big ones are confirmation bias and repetition. In that, if we're scrolling through social media, for example, and we're trying to decide if actually we don't even think is something true or not, but we see something and it confirms what we already think is true, we don't question it. Why would we question it? It seems right. It's information that conflicts what we already think is true that we start to question. But this is why misinformation can bypass that filter. It seems like it's true. And the second thing is repetition. The more we hear it repeated, the more likely we are to believe it. This is called the illusion of the illusory truth effect. Propagandists are well aware of this. Basically, if you repeat it enough, people are likely to believe it. In studies, even if you tell people initially that the information is false, the more they hear it, the more likely they are to believe it. The next is social influences. Social proof is we accept what others around us believe. Tribe in particular is the group of people that we identify with. So the more the people we identify with accept certain beliefs, the more likely we are to accept the belief. And also misplaced trust. We trust sources that align with our beliefs and identity, and not necessarily those that align with standards that are set up to vet truth. Next is psychological factors. These are things like our motivated reasoning, which is driven by what the elephant wants to believe, our emotions, and our identity. And then finally, there is so much out there. There's so much coming at us all the time that there's just too much to think critically through. And so we don't, right? We get overloaded. And so we rely more on the shortcuts. Now, all of these are overlapping, obviously, but they all contribute to our vulnerability to misinformation. So that if we want to not fall for misinformation, we need to be aware of our particular vulnerabilities. Now, misinformation itself works in certain ways. So, for example, are you seeing this tweet here?
Yes,
Um,
with
Them
the
and us.
London thing.
Yeah, so
London.
this is a real
Happened.
tweet. So us them. This was from Texas Lone Star. Do you remember there was a 2017 terrorist attack on Westminster Bridge in London?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, there's a 52-year-old British man who drove his car into pedestrians. It injured over 50. It killed 4. He finally he stabbed a police officer and killed a police officer. Okay, after the terrorist attack, this account here, Texas Lone Star, tweeted various things. This is one of the examples of this woman in a hijab on her phone saying that that's them. They are ignoring this pain here, but us here are caring, and we want to protect people around us. His bio said that he was a proud Texan, an American patriot. There were hashtags showing support for the Second Amendment, which is the right to bear arms, opposition to abortion, support for Trump. He attacked Barack Hussein Obama as a traitor. He gained followers very quickly. He had over 50,000 followers, and he stoked a lot of outrage against Muslims. He eventually ended up in, I'm laughing because there's like, it's just so ridiculous and so painful that that's my defense mechanism, I suppose. But he was on the Daily Mail front page. He, thank you, British libs, you're making me famous. And this stoked outrage on both the right and the left. On the right, it stoked outrage against Muslims because they were uncaring against this terrorist attack. And on the left, it stoked outrage against this supposed American patriot that was demonizing an us versus them. However, this account actually was from the Russian Internet Research Agency, the IRA, the troll farm, right? This was a fake account that was set up to specifically sow outrage. It used emotions, it played to our biases, it played to the us versus them, and it worked remarkably well. So misinformation tends to play into these biases. It uses what's called loaded language. So loaded language, there's different kinds of loaded language. This is emotionally biased language. There's euphemisms and dysphemisms, but there's also what are called ultimate terms, which are propaganda terms. If you broadly think of propaganda terms as being positive and negative, they're called God terms and devil terms. So God terms are those that evoke strong positive emotions, and because they're positive, they almost demand obedience or allegiance to them. They're hard to argue against. Versus devil terms are a strong negative emotions, and basically no one likes them, so we're universally opposed to them. I made this graphic here as an example, and you can see all of the terms in here that are they're loaded. They're language that is intended to play upon emotions and lead us to a particular conclusion. No one is opposed to freedoms or patriots, but criminals and toxic. All of these are intended to provoke these emotions. When we are evaluating information, one of the great giveaways is how it makes us feel. So pay attention to the emotions that it triggers. And it uses logical fallacies. Now, there's a variety of logical fallacies. I mean, there's like a trillion of them, I swear. They're not necessarily giveaways of misinformation, but misinformation tends to rely heavily on them. For example, the appeal to nature and appeal to tradition. Are you familiar with logical fallacies? I'm assuming so. So logical fallacies are errors in reasoning. These are informal fallacies, and they don't necessarily indicate that something is not true, but they're a good warning sign. So if I said, for example, that something is all natural and has been used for, I'm traveling, I haven't had my hair done in a very long time. I finally made an appointment today, and it was a salon that specializes in all natural treatments. And they use all natural ingredients because they're healthier and safer and so on. Look, obviously, I didn't probe them on that, and I don't give a crap whether they're natural or not, but that was their shtick. And to a lot of people, that plays. The beauty treatment, the diet, it's all natural. People have been doing it for centuries or for millennia. Those convince us without evidence. There's the false cause fallacy or mistaking correlation for causation. This is incredibly common. Like, this happened, then this happened, so there must be a relationship between the two. Like, I wore my crystal necklace and I felt better that day. Or I didn't know this one, burying the St. Joseph statue in my yard, and then my house sold. So it must be the St. Joseph statue. There was a reason that my house sold. Or false choice. This is oversimplifying into a binary, this or that, socialism or freedom. You're with me or you're against me. These binary choices, by the way they're presented, there is a right answer for the person who is presenting these. They intend to lead you to their right answer. It ignores the slew of possibilities in between. Cherry picking, like, look, this is true. I gave you the example with the water and like serial killers admitted to drinking water. I can select evidence that makes almost any case. The question is, what does a body of evidence say? And the straw man is probably the most commonly used and effective strategy against strongly supported scientific conclusions, because it is the easiest way to defeat an argument, to misrepresent it. Right? Evolutionary theory says that all living things share a common ancestor. So science says God doesn't exist and I came from a monkey. No, that's not what that is at all. But by phrasing it that way, it is much easier to defeat. So logical fallacies are a key way of recognizing misinformation. Do you know who Belle Gibson is?
Yes.
You know, there's a Netflix documentary with her now. So more Americans are waking up to Belle Gibson. For those of you who maybe don't know, Belle Gibson was in, was it 2012? She was diagnosed with brain cancer, terminal brain cancer. And so she documented her journey to curing her terminal brain cancer with a healthy diet. She created an app that was like app of the year, health app of the year under Apple. She had a book. She was in like Oprah and like all the front covers of magazines, and things started to not add up, and people went digging, and it turns out she never had brain cancer.
Huh.
But here's the thing. Humans are storytelling creatures. We relate to stories. I could show you tables and data and explain how stories are done and eyes glaze over. But I tell you a compelling story about how I saw a ghost when I was a kid, and you're going to remember that. That's the danger of stories, though. Stories tend to not be, stories are often not representative of reality. They're a sample size of one. We tend to remember things more vividly when they're rare. They're not controlled. So like here's an example from a chiropractor, an ad that claims that they have cured autism in a 3-year-old. Okay.
You need to know this.
This kind of stuff pisses me off. I don't know if they're intentionally doing it or not. Nevertheless, like if I'm a parent of a kid who is on the spectrum and I see something like this, it gives me hope, and I want that hope. And so I see the story and I might be convinced by the story. The data itself is pretty boring, is pretty bland. Who knows? Was this kid actually on the spectrum? Did the kid improve because of the chiropractic treatment, or was it something else? We don't know without a story. So we have to be really careful when somebody is telling a compelling and emotional story. Misinformation also tends to sow distrust. It has to. In order for it to convince you of something, it has to separate us from reliable sources of information, which means if you don't trust them, maybe you'll trust us. Everybody else is lying. I'm telling the truth. In science, this tends to look a lot like you're a shill for something, the famous shill gambit. Do you know how many times I've been convinced of being a shill for something? I'm still waiting for my check. It never seems to appear. I'm trying to help people not fall for misinformation just because that is the right thing to do. I could use my powers for evil in a much more I could make a whole lot more money doing that. The problem is, this is purposefully sowing distrust. Again, we get to the difference between misinformation and disinformation. And so we don't always know what someone's intentions are. Nevertheless, we have to be careful of somebody saying they're all lying. If there is a truth, no one has a monopoly on the truth. The truth is verifiable from different sources. Okay, so there's fingerprints of misinformation, and there's different types of misinformation. This is my humble attempt at trying to organize misinformation into broad categories. I'm going to very briefly cover some of these, from potentially problematic to conspiracy theories. It's not a hierarchy. There's lots of overlap, but there are patterns. So, for example, potentially problematic would be something like satire. This here is part of my story with Facebook.
Selling that?
Are you seeing this? What?
Yeah, are you selling that, the Oscar Mayer Halloween?
You know what? I will accept checks. Feel free. So a few years ago, this went around on social media, and I was seeing people who were like nutritionists and people who study misinformation, honestly, people who should know better. And they were sharing this on social media with something like, can you believe Americans' diets? And I understand, like, Americans eat crappy food. But remember why we fall for misinformation. It confirms our biases, it's repeated, it appeals to our emotions. And in this case, I thought, well, wait, that doesn't seem quite right. So I looked it up, and in fact, it is satire. I use this as an example on social media to teach people how to fact check. So I shared this with my graphic of how to fact check. And, step one, be skeptical. Wait a minute, does this sound true? Here's how to search. Facebook let this image spread for weeks. And then it flagged me for sharing it, a doctored image, and put me in jail, and limited my ability to try and help people not fall for misinformation. I would like to say I'm not bitter, but I'm totally bitter, so I can't even pull that off. Nevertheless, satire is intended to make a point. It's a joke. It plays on something to make a point. It's exaggerated. It's supposed to be funny, but people can fall for it. A really good. Do you know what the Onion is? The website, The Onion.
Nice.
Okay, it's been sold, which is its own irony. But I think it was 2012. It shared an article about how Kim Jong-un was named the sexiest man alive by American media. And North Korean media ran with it because, of course, their dear leader was obviously the sexiest man alive. People can fall for it. Also disguised ads. So there's native ads, advertorials, sponsored content. It looks like native content. If you're not paying attention, through Instagram, influencers, are they being paid for this? It doesn't necessarily discount the information itself, but it does mean somebody was paid to show you this. So they might have a vested interest.
Yes, the same stuffing.
Say it again.
Go on, Sally. Yeah.
Sorry. There was a study on
That
college
lovely man.
that showed that. Oh, okay. Hold it back up again. I'm screenshotting. Oh, there you go. There you go. Okay, excellent. That was amazing. Less than 10% of people can correctly identify sponsored content. Literally think about that for a second. The number of things that are scrolling through as we're going through our feed. If somebody has paid for us to see it, most people, the vast majority of people, cannot correctly identify that. It does say, if you notice at the top left and the top right, paid advertisement, but you sometimes have to really look. Okay, there's misleading content. In this case, for example, contextonomy. This here is a real tweet, and it's a real photo of, says retweet if you say no to animal testing. Okay, this went far and wide. As somebody who's a biologist, and anybody involved in vet med knows that that's what you do to cats when you put them down for surgery. That was part of an adopt-a-thon. So the point is, that is a real photo, but it's used out of context to make a story that is not accurate. Quote mining is another great example. Like if I scroll through people's quotes and find something, I can misrepresent them to say almost anything. Clickbait is another example. And this I'll let you.
It's a long while.
Looks like lunch.
You won't. Okay. And then there's hyperpartisan. These are sites that are sharing a decidedly one side of the story. Breitbart is a great example. Birth control makes women unattractive and crazy. Do you know Breitbart?
No.
No.
Oh God, Breitbart.
No, we're culturally
business.
deprived. We're culturally deprived here, as you know.
Didn't they
Actually,
go out of business, Breitbart?
Yeah, we're so deprived we don't get the alternative facts.
yeah, like I'm seriously waiting for somebody in Australia to adopt me. I need to move. Okay, there's deceptive content. In early 2020, when Australia was on fire, and before the world went into pandemic
Hello?
mode, this went around. Did you see this photo?
No.
I think we did. Well, I think that was on Media Watch at one
Yeah.
point. Yeah. We
Well,
have
I
we
hope
have a program on the ABC that looks at some of the imagery that comes out.
Oh, yes.
I mean, lots of red flags there.
Yeah. Great Photoshop work.
It's great Photoshop work. Yeah.
Yeah, the fire coming up to the beach was real, and people going into the sea to escape from the fire. But
Not
putting
real.
those images together is obviously quite deceptive, isn't it? Yeah.
And now with AI, they can do really realistic looking movies. Like they had one of a koala climbing up a emu or a giraffe, which was clearly fake, but it kind of looked real.
Yes.
Yeah. AI is oh gosh, if we had a chance to talk more about AI at the end, if you want to, please let me know, because in the olden days, like seeing was believing, although you have to be careful because you could still crop a photo or split things together to make it look like something that actually didn't happen. But now actually, yeah, you can totally generate things that are completely untrue.
Oh,
Now this is a
we've done that in media for so long that in the 1960s they pointed out that if you zoom the shot in, there's got all these protesters and so on. Looks very busy, and all you have to do is zoom out by about 10 degrees, and all you suddenly realize is just a small group of people. It doesn't take much to decontextualize something.
Yeah.
absolutely. Okay, now you know who Eric Trump is, right?
Yeah.
You're I
Presidential hopeful Donald Trump.
Just
no, this is a real tweet. He really did share this and this article. But look at the news source. abcnews.com.co.
Is that
Now, abcnews.com is a reliable source. It's ABC News. But what some imposter sources do is mimic real sources by adding letters or changing things slightly to make it look like it's a reliable source. So he fell for this. And why would he fall for this? Well, because it confirmed his bias and it triggered his emotions, and he probably heard it repeated.
Yeah,
And then completely
I'm surprised they don't bother just putting it abcnews.com. Then they don't have to worry about all the other letters.
I mean, they can't, well, abcnews.com is a real site. They'd have to make something up.
Well, I mean, it would at least be honest.
but it wouldn't, he fell for it. So he
Yeah.
got it from the fake site.
He fell for it. He
Mm.
did. He fell. This here is from the olden days of what we used to call fake news. Fake news as a term is basically lost all meaning, but it is completely made up. So this spread in the run-up to that'd be the 2016 election, and it is totally not true. But on the right information echo chamber, this went around. However, this
Yeah.
went around the left.
The
Also,
dumbest of those.
everything up there.
Isn't that a wonderful truth? What he says.
in my echo chamber, in my filter bubble on the left side, like I still see people sharing this thinking it's true, and it's not true. This is completely made up. So the point is, we can all fall for misinformation when it confirms our biases and it triggers those emotions. And then we have science related, which I think is how you all found me, because I had a science and its pretenders article in Australian magazine. Science related misinformation I've broadly categorized into what I call science is pretenders, pseudoscience and science denial. And both of them pretend to be scientific, but pseudoscience is motivated, there's the elephant, by wanting to believe. And when we want to believe something, our standard of evidence is lower. Science denial is motivated by not wanting to believe. And when we don't want to believe, we set our standard of evidence impossibly high. So for example, this is from the Journal of Creation. It's a creationist from the Institute of Creation Research. It is their attempt to mimic science by putting out something that looks sciencey, but it does not follow science's methodology. It's not peer reviewed. It uses lots of technobabble, but it in wrong ways. It is mostly used to cast shade on evolution while not actually providing any original peer-reviewed research. But if I wanted to believe this, then it's pretty convincing. Another example would be lots of health and wellness, right? Here we have an appeal to nature, how I beat cancer through diet and herbs. When we need hope, we would lower our standard of evidence. Like when I go to when I go to Target and I'm looking for a moisturizer, oh, this one says it makes me look younger. That hope is pretty powerful. Or when this says that it's low calorie. I can lose weight doing this. Oh, that's great, right? That kind of stuff is potentially just a waste of money and time, as opposed to not using evidence-based medicine for in place of something like natural. Anyway, when we want to believe something, our standard of evidence is lower. On the other hand, science denial, we don't want to believe. A common refrain here is using Galileo. It's actually called the Galileo Gambit, which is, well, Galileo was proven right, so I must be right. And there's lots of problems with this. Like, for example, Galileo wasn't completely out of line. Galileo was the astronomer who proposed that the Earth was the sun was the center of the solar system, not the Earth. It wasn't completely out of line with what astronomers actually thought at the time. And also, he had evidence. And also, scientists weren't the ones who put him under house arrest. It was the church, and the church was ideologically motivated. So what's happening here is, I find it so ironic. It's like pulling up something from 400, 500 years ago to try and make my case today. There are people who disagree with the consensus all the time, and most of the time they're just wrong. The difference is evidence. But a lot of them appeal to Galileo. Now, importantly, there are denial campaigns that are different from the people who fall for them. The tobacco industry famously had what is called the tobacco model, in that they did not want their product to be regulated. Their scientists and other scientists knew very well that nicotine was addictive, that smoking cigarettes caused health problems such as lung cancer and other issues, but they didn't want their products to be regulated. And so they implemented a campaign of denial where their goal was to sow doubt. This is from a memo from 1969, where they said, doubt is our product, since it's the best means of competing with a body of fact that exists in the minds of the general public. The tobacco industry implemented this campaign not with the sole they realized they didn't need to prove science wrong or even make their own case. They just needed to cast enough doubt that people went, we don't know, I can keep smoking. Why would we tax? Why would we regulate? The same scientists and the same think tanks were involved with greenhouse gases and anthropogenic climate change. So the oil and gas industry with CFCs and the ozone layer. These scientists, do you know the work of Naomi Oreskes? If you don't, you really should. Naomi Oreskes is a science historian out of Harvard, and she has a wonderful book called Merchants of Doubt, where she documented this strategy and its use in other denial campaigns. Their initial goal was not money. It was ideology. This was after the Cold War, where there was a strong anti-communist sentiment in the United States, where they were opposed to government regulation. And so they were opposed to things, any issue that might require the government to regulate. The point here is that a denial campaign is purposeful disinformation, and the people who fall for it are victims of that disinformation. Now, pseudoscience and science denial often play on each other. They're like two sides of the same coin. This is from a textbook from Atlanta, Georgia. It's not there anymore, but in the United States, we have constant fights about putting evolution in science. And so there's attempts to put creationism in there. Now, this cartoon shows evolution versus creation, where evolution is divorce and homosexuality and pornography and abortion, whereas creation is all good things, right? Christianity and Christ. If I want to deny evolution, my background is as a young earth creationist. I grew up in a church that viewed evolution as lies from the devil, from them. God was good, creation was good. So that if I wanted to deny the science that is the most fundamental theory in all of the life sciences, I had to replace it with something, and that would be creation. So my desire to deny evolution meant that my standard of evidence was here, and my desire to accept creationism and my standard of evidence was here, but the two were playing on each other, and both were motivated by my elephant, by my tribe, by my desire to believe or not believe something. And if we dig down far enough to any misinformation, we will eventually find conspiracy theories. Do you know who James Inhofe is? He is a longtime senator from Oklahoma who wrote this book here about how climate change is the greatest hoax to ever perpetuate humanity. Was it 2016 when there was a lot of snow? We had major snowstorms throughout the Northeast. He brought a snowball into the floor of the Senate, supposedly the world's most deliberative body. He brought a snowball in to show that climate change was not real, because look, snow. So here he has the greatest hoax. There is really no other way to explain why almost all the world's experts disagree with the narrative, except they're conspiring. We have, what if I told you there are multiple cures for cancer, but they're suppressed because cancer is worth so much money. You dig down far enough, you find a conspiracy. This is, I went to a Bigfoot museum recently. It was fascinating. The woman was true blue believer in Bigfoot. She had all kinds of evidence because like she thought she saw one and like tree breaks and like the evidence was really low because she wanted to believe. And finally, I started to press her, and she said that there was evidence, there were bodies, and the university, the local university had those bodies, but they disappeared because the government took them because they wanted to cover them.
They wanted to.
You need to find a way to justify your belief in the face of evidence. And this is what our elephant does. It makes excuses until it's a conspiracy.
The
Okay.
X-Files all over again. The truth is out there.
So back to Ed Graves. So Ed died in
Could I just ask a question at that point? Sorry to interrupt.
No, it's
because we have vulnerabilities to such errors, for example, and we can be baited into them by these techniques. And there are actual conspiracies of people who get together to do things, and then criminal conspiracies. And Actually, sorry, there's a psychological theory behind it would be that there's the presence of a self-interest and egocentric bias. And there are, creatures amongst us who are psychopathic, who don't mind creating really shrewd strategies, for example, to profit. I don't know if it's, I feel a little bit outed, but in the sense that there are people who will do these things, and they've been studied, I think, extensively in psychology as psychopaths or sociopaths in that form, who are interested in manipulating other people's reality, for example, through the information they share or deny or any of these kinds of things. Yeah, I think I've just had a bit of an emotional reaction to it, which is around the suppressing of truth. For example, governments, like we're seeing all the news at the moment, they bring the truth about, let's say, billions of dollars of very motivated denial on their part. So it just strikes me that it's not merely a vulnerability. There is another component to it, which is there are people with this kind of amoral approach that will.
You're not wrong. And that's important. And actually, so there are studies on the personality traits of people who believe conspiracy theories. Actually, the single most predictive factor of whether somebody believes in a conspiracy theory is whether they believe in another conspiracy theory. Basically, if somebody believes in conspiracy theories, they tend to buy in a lot of them, even if they're conflicting. It doesn't tend to matter if the beliefs are conflicting. What matters is an overall, like, something is wrong and mistrust. And there's also like a narcissistic tendency. I'm talking about believers, not perpetrators, in that I feel special. Like I know something that the sheeple don't know. And there's also a correlation with people's ability to recognize patterns. Like we all recognize patterns. We also recognize patterns that aren't real. Conspiracy theorists tend to have heightened pattern recognition. There are real conspiracies, obviously. And so to me, when I talk specifically about conspiracy theories, it is important to note that there are real conspiracies. Conspiratorial thinking, though, is not a way to find conspiracy. Conspiratorial thinking, it's the motivated reasoning to constantly confirm the narrative, as opposed to trying to find truth, which means subjecting those beliefs to evidence. As far as people who actually perpetrate these, I mean, we know people are capable of this kind of thing. And so we want to be able to identify it and call it out, which is the difference in my mind between conspiratorial thinking and critical thinking. Critical thinking can help us find it and call those things out, whereas conspiratorial thinking won't do it. You're onto something really important here. Let me keep going here.
I feel special.
Ed Graves here. Ed Graves passed away in 2009. His cause of death is not public. He was 57 at the time. This here shows him with his logic flow chart that proved that HIV was from a lab leak from Fort Detrick. He denied the science of where we knew HIV came from. He fell for pseudoscience in that the supposed miracle cures that he thought would make him better. And he fell for conspiracy theories in the American government being the source of this virus. He was also incredibly smart, so this was not due to a lack of intelligence. Now, why would he fall for this? Are you familiar with the Tuskegee experiments?
Yeah, thought you were going to say that. Yeah.
So, like in the United States, in the Tuskegee experiment of was Black men with syphilis were thought they were getting treated for syphilis, but they weren't. And the experiment was to see what happened when they weren't treated. This experiment started in the early 30s. It continued past when we knew that penicillin was an effective treatment for syphilis. It continued until 1972. 1972. By the time it continued, it stopped. 130 of them had died from syphilis or related complications. 40 of their spouses had been infected. It had passed to 19 of their kids. The last participant died in 2004. This was not ancient memory. To him, the US government was fully capable of doing something like this. Okay, this here is from, it's a real headline from the Patriot magazine from India in July of 1983. AIDS may invade India. Mystery disease caused by US experiments. So take a peek at it if you will. This here was part of the Siegel report. In 1986, the Siegel report was from a French biologist, biologist, supposedly, Jakob Siegel, who is an East German, who claimed that AIDS was created at Fort Detrick as a bioweapon, and that it was given to gay prisoners who then spread it as they were released in New York and California. By 1987, here is Dan Rather covering it on the news. We now know that that initial plan, this initial entire idea came from the Russian government, the USSR, in Operation Infection, which was their plan of claiming that the US government created HIV as a bioweapon against gays and blacks. They planted it in an Indian English-speaking newspaper, continued to plant it elsewhere, refer back to the original, let it spread, repeat, refer back, repeat, refer back, until finally it was repeated enough that something like, I have my statistic here. By 1987, it had been covered in major media outlets in 80 countries in 30 different languages. Black Americans today continue to believe this. Now, the 1980s was also the height of the Cold War. The US was fighting the USSR. The USSR could not outmatch our military, and so what they did was fought an information warfare. They did stories them and continued to let them spread until we attacked each other from the inside. Divide the enemy from the inside. Sow distrust. Plant a story. Repeat, repeat, repeat until it's believed.
Is that astroturfing? Is that an example?
Ed Graves.
Is that
Astroturfing is when grassroots organization is invented to create to assert a supposed cause. This would be more like, this is classic disinformation. Like this is disinformation, which is misinformation that's a lie that's intended to sow distrust. My good friend here, Lee McIntyre, who has a book called Disinformation, I highly recommend it. In it, he says distrust and not doubt is the prime objective of disinformation campaigns. Mere doubt can be overcome with evidence, but distrust cannot. The goal isn't necessarily to convince someone of narrative. It's not someone that isn't true. It's to sow and to sow distrust until people go, I don't know, what do I believe? And then they just retreat into their bubbles where they confirm what they already think is true. The problem is someone like Ed Graves felt empowered by this. Conspiracy theories can feel empowering. I know something the plebeians don't. I have insider knowledge. I know they were trying to harm me. But all of that led to him probably dying an early death and spreading that misinformation to others in his community who trusted him to not use condoms because they were infected with HIV, as they were told, to not take antiretrovirals because those were the government trying to give you something. It hurts the people who feel empowered by it. Okay, misinformation is a right? Misinformation, we're lured into it by our own biases. And once we get there, it's sticky. It's hard to dislodge. It becomes part of our web of belief. And once it's there, it's really hard to fight. And when we're talking to others, we assume evidence that we were. So we had to use the same evidence to convince them, and that's not true. All that's to say, there's a difference between misinformation and disinformation. We need to be aware of how our vulnerabilities contribute to us falling for it. We also need to understand how misinformation itself works. I personally don't always like to focus on disinformation. There are times when we know somebody's lying. We know somebody is purposely trying to deceive us and mislead us, in which case it is important to call it out. But a lot of times we don't. And if I'm trying to address false information and I'm hung up on intent, then I might miss the forest for the trees. So if we know, call it out. Otherwise, just know how it works. Know why we're vulnerable. Make sure we place our trust wisely. And also when we're talking to other people, remember to be kind. There's a reason they have fallen for it. They're not likely to change their mind by mocking, calling them stupid, right? The more we put our identity out there, the less likely we are to change. And so the elephant, talk to their elephant. Thank you so much for your time, and I'm looking forward to questions. So, am I still sharing my screen?
Yeah.
Okay.
What was the name of that book? Naomi
Oreskes.
Merchants of Doubt.
ESKE. And it's called she has a recent book called
Doubt, isn't it?
also really good, but it's called The Merchants of Doubt.
Thank you.
Actually, there's
Yeah,
also
makes sense.
documentary series. I think it's a 3-part documentary series. It's really good.
Oh, okay, cool. Thank you.
I have a
Yeah,
couple of
the
comments.
disinformation. Yeah, the disinformation
Anyway.
slide that you had, where you had the middle one where you see the shot of the come from the Matrix. It certainly resonates, the idea of conspiracy. You almost want to ask, is it the red or the blue pill?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and conspiracy theorists are convinced they have taken the pill that helps them see reality as it is.
It's so, again, too valued.
Conspiratorial thinking itself is a trap, because once you get in there, all information is like interpreted to be part of the conspiracy. The best you can do is avoid that avoid the rabbit hole.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'll just send you I'll send everyone a link to Wikipedia on intelligence source information reliability, which was used in the Second World War. So if you want to have a look at that,
Brilliant.
you'll see it has it's much bigger categories than I thought. And you can see that it's well and truly from a thumbs up and a thumbs down.
Mm.
Melanie,
And since
go on.
since we're talking about either or, what in binary thinking we in GS use the terminology either or distortion. Now, an example of this would be evolution or creation, and misses out other options. Like I read once that life came on Earth because aliens came along in their spacecraft and seeded the planet.
But where
So,
did
yeah,
their
that's
life
another
come from?
possibility. Yeah, well, I mean, if you go with the God one, where did God come from? You know, you can keep asking the question backwards and forwards.
No,
And
but
you were going on about propaganda. I was wondering whether you've read this book on propaganda.
Who's the author?
Can you read it?
Lee.
Yeah, the Fine Art of Propaganda by Lee. Yeah, they might give you some useful ideas.
What
I
in
can email you
creating
the
more
book.
some ideas on creating more effective propaganda.
Yeah.
or dissecting
It
it.
shows you that they use to pull the wool over your eyes, so it makes you aware of what to look out for. Yeah. Anyway, that's
Yes.
what I was going to say.
Sorry, people, I've got to go. Thanks for the information. Very pleased. I won't trust anybody ever again. Oh, doubtful. Bye all.
No.
Good evening.
He was only joking.
Yeah, well, I'm disillusioned now. You can't get my trust back. Yeah.
Yes. Okay, see you, Brett. Just before we quite run out of time, Melanie, earlier you did promise, you made a tantalising little promise that you'd come back and tell us something about your experience with Facebook in this post-fact checking era that we've seemed to have now entered.
Yes. Again, this is something that triggers me. So I have been in Facebook jail so many times for things like I shared the satire with the Halloweeners. But at one point I was, do you know the famous what is his name? He was the Nazi propagandist, Goebbels. The repetition.
Goebbels, sorry.
So
Goebbels.
Yeah, Goebbels.
That would be the idea that like the more something is repeated, the more that propagandists are aware of this. So they flagged me for hate speech for that. And so jail. And then after that, the satire thing. And then I shared potato diversity from the 80s. And then mass extinctions of time. And apparently all of those contributed to my being, I don't know, I was put in jail and they just weren't sharing any of my stuff. And so I gave up on Facebook. Thankfully, I have a friend who had an in who helped me, but I know a lot of science communicators who deal with this. Here's the thing, if we want to address misinformation, it is really hard to address the misinformation without referencing said misinformation. And those algorithms, what they do is they go out, the bots, and they're like, oh, they said this thing, and then put them in jail. And then what do you do?
It's just not sexy, enough. It's just not sexy enough. When I first heard misinformation, I was thinking of a shot of from Miss Congeniality with a sash saying misinformation.
Joked about calling myself misinformation.
Yeah, I was waiting for a sash.
I'd be put in jail just for the name, I think.
I mean, why not own the notoriety? Maybe you should be in the dress too at the same time with a sash.
Oh,
Yeah.
a pageant, a crown, and the whole thing.
Yeah, misinformation. Perfect.
So Michael, were you trying to get it in the last minute comment here?
I was going to ask another question, if that's okay. First of all, maybe a comment question, if that's okay. I was going to say, excellent presentation. Thank you very much for the time and all the great information. Thanks for responding to the questions. I was curious about what topics your book further explores. And because this is kind of the area of my learning at the moment, is around models of critical thinking. And I'm wondering, does yours synthesize other models? Do you have your own model about critical thinking? And yeah, that's kind of my question.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I actually, yes, first about the critical thinking. I have I have a new article out about the different kinds of critical thinking. That's one of those terms where like we mean different things when we say critical thinking. For most of the educational standards for science, for example, what we mean is like problem solving, thinking like a scientist. So like designing experiments, collecting evidence, drawing conclusions, and all of that's great and all, but you need to have in-depth knowledge about an area to be able to think critically about it. And I personally worry about teaching critical thinking in that way, in that in classrooms, we give students reliable information, and in the real world, those guardrails are off. And we don't also teach them about intellectual humility and recognizing the limits of what they don't know and relying on others' expertise and finding reliable sources of information. So I distinguish that kind of critical thinking from what I call broadly good thinking, which is understanding our understanding is so metacognition, how we come to our belief, the lens of our perception and memory, the kind of fallacies that we tell ourselves when we're arguing certain conclusions, the kinds of emotional and biased reasoning that can lead us to certain conclusions, as opposed to the problem-solving version. The good thinking version is generalizable to different subjects. So teaching students, teaching broadly that kind of good thinking can help us find reliable sources and align our beliefs with what's more likely to be true, as opposed to giving ourselves the kinds of having to become experts in every single subject so that we can think critically through it. My book on misinformation addresses misinformation this way, first in helping us understand good thinking, and then how the different types of misinformation work. When I approach this in class, I use what's called inoculation theory, specifically active inoculation, which is the idea like you can like we can give a vaccine with a bit of a pathogen to build up immunity to a real world exposure to the virus. We can do something similar with misinformation by exposing the mind to a bit of the virus, a bit of the misinformation, along with techniques to resist the persuasion. And then develop inoculate against it. The active inoculation is creating the misinformation. So when I teach creating the misinformation, so for example, when I teach my students about conspiracy theories, I teach them how conspiracies work, and then I have them make conspiracy theories. So develop your own conspiracy theory. Use humor, like you know me, cats and farts, that kind of thing. Develop your own silly conspiracy theory. Find evidence to support it, and then
Yeah.
say, okay, you need to convince them of your conspiracy, but they need to prove you wrong. So you need to maintain your conspiracy in the face of that attempt to disprove, which is really the magic of conspiratorial thinking. So the book attempts to use these kinds of like lighthearted and training wheels approach to inoculate against these different kinds of misinformation. And by the way, I should say I'm still in the process of writing it, so I don't know what it will look like in the final version. It currently looks like.
Yeah.
Our sound was breaking up a bit there, but I think we got the message.
Yes.
Thanks, Melanie.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. It's an amazing topic, and I really appreciate the opportunity. And very nice to meet all of you as well, who are
Yes,
part of
me
the
too.
semantics, general semantics. Yeah.
I would add, there's somebody in your neck of the woods out of Melbourne, his Cook, who is a inoculation researcher who has a wonderful game called Cranky Uncle. And it uses inoculation theory to teach you how science denial works. He also he's funny, and I don't know, maybe somebody you might like to speak to.
Sure, sure. Thank you very much. I'll keep reading. I really enjoyed the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
So thanks, Melanie. It's what 10 o'clock your time. Time for supper, and thanks for adjusting your schedule to fit in with our time, which it can be upset by daylight saving at either end, but this time it's not so inconvenient, I think. Yeah. Look, thank you very much, and I'll pass on thanks also to your tech advisor. Would you got you going sufficiently, and we got there eventually. Yeah. We all have issues with this. We'll follow up with you if we may, and we'll certainly keep a link on our website to your site. And if you'd like us to put any special promotions or anything there, we'd be pleased to carry that for further exposure. Yeah. If we think there's too much propaganda happening there, we'll apply some filters to it. Yeah.
And Cranky Uncle is an app you can download to just do.
Thank you, Anne.
Yes.
Melanie, did you get that link that I sent in the meeting chat?
I did.
Yeah,
Thank you.
It was a
Thank you,
a lot more nuanced than even what I explained.
Thank you, Dion. We'll put a link for that on the website also.
Yeah.
Okay, guys. Well, we'll follow up our business life here by email, but we'll I think say goodbye for now.
Yeah.
And thank you very much, Melanie, for coming in today.
Thank you, Mel. It was lovely to meet you.
Meet you.
Right.
Thank you so much.
Really good.
And thank you,
It's very
Jason, for introducing Melanie to us. That was really good.
Oh, that was David.
All right. Yeah, right. Okay, thanks, David. Okay,
David.
all the best, guys, and we'll see you again soon.
Okay.
If I may,
Yeah.
if I may, I'd like to introduce Jeff Wardkowitz for joining us today. As
Yes.
I missed my opportunity at the start of the meeting, but I want to thank Jeff Wardkowitz for joining us today as well.
Yes, thank you. And it was a really interesting presentation, and we learnt a lot. Thank you very much.
And Jeff, when we come to Brooklyn, you have to show us the beach there.
You're still muted, Jeff.
Oh, he's muted.
Yeah, he's muted.
Just south of MA.
Yeah. Okay, guys, all the best, and we'll see you again.
What did you want to see in Brooklyn? I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah, we want to see the beach there and the palm
The
trees.
which?
We have been to Brooklyn.
The beach and the palm trees.
Well, there are beaches. I don't think there are too many palm trees in Brooklyn.
I know behind you that's generated electronically.
Oh, yes. Well, you just have to take a look at the postcards of the Gold Coast, I think.
Oh, yes.
So where is that from? Is that Waikiki Beach or something?
I don't know. I just thought it was much better than having an office that was empty and looked ugly.
That
There's
all
a
made
good
us
one
wish
for outer space.
that we
too.
wanted to be there.
Yeah, you could have one with the planets, in the solar system
Oh,
to
yes,
see if
yeah.
you're
From anything from the vast picture library. Yeah. Okay, guys, all the best.
Okay.
Thank you.